So I remember a day on May 22nd in the town I live in, back in 2011, mowing my yard. Everything's pretty normal. I get word there's supposed to be a storm coming in. And I don't really think a whole lot about it. Like I said, I live way out in the country, and we're just kind of hanging out mowing the yard. It's a beautiful sunshiny day. Kind of get word from my wife that there's a storm that's rolling into town, and I'm thinking, okay, I'll try to finish up the mowing, and then, okay, there's some tornado watches and warnings coming in, and we finally say, all right, well, maybe we should go down into our crawl space in our house. We drop down in, and then I'm sitting there with my wife and my kids, and we've got the radio on, and we're listening, and they start listing off buildings and start listing off different areas in the town I live in that are absolutely, completely gone. They talk about Academy Sports is gone, and Home Depot is gone, and Walgreens is gone, and then they start listing off the Walmart is completely gone. And this is like 5 o'clock on a Sunday evening, and so anybody that gone in to go shopping that day, you can imagine how crowded on a Sunday evening on a beautiful spring night, how crowded a Walmart was, or Home Depot, and people in the parking lot, people driving up and down the road, people that were eating at Pizza Hut that night, or at Wendy's, or any of the restaurants that were down that strip. And I still remember listening to this radio, and it all sounded fuzzy in my mind. And then all of a sudden we got a call from my neighbor, and he was out of town, and his wife called us and said, hey, Richard's out of town. He wants to know, can you drive in town and check on his mom? And I said, okay, where does she live? And so he kind of gave me rough estimates, and I jumped in my truck and trying to find back ways to get in, and there's power lines down, and there's just, the whole city's just dark. There's no lights on at all, and I'm trying to find my way, and I finally show up to this apartment complex, and he gives me the number, and there's no roof. There's no doors. There's literally vehicles up on top of this apartment. And I don't even know which building is which. The labels are all gone, and the walls have fallen in, and I'm walking around, I'm trying to yell her name, and it's lightning out and thunder, and I look across where this Walmart used to be, and it's gone. It's just gone. I don't know where to go or what to do, and so I jump on my pickup, bouncing up in four-wheel drive, trying to get through back roads and trying to find ways around through yards and fields and everything else until I make myself, and I get all the way back home. I turn on the news, and we just start watching it, and realize that this massive tornado, one of the largest in history, has swept through our little town, and it is just wiped out. It's gone. And I wonder, man, what do I do? I mean, it's one of those things sometimes where you just like, do I risk it? Do I go in town? I remember watching these days go by, just wondering, man, what is my response right now? I mean, I'm not equipped. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. And hearing stories about, like the guy on stage last night, Eric. I remember going to his house, and the roof was completely off. He and his wife and his little daughter had gone into a little crawl space because he was helping prep move to get on the road at our warehouse. I remember walking through and just seeing everything that Eric owned was gone. A few days later, I went and I started volunteering. And I remember there was this guy. It doesn't matter where it was, but there was a hospital full of people having babies, people with cancer, people with, pneumonia, whatever, all the surgeries coming, everything that had happened in a hospital, just a big, like 4 or 5-story hospital, it's gone. I'm sitting in this parking lot where they had done surgeries on people and worked on people, and you can see over here there's gauze, and it's got blood all over it, and there's gurneys that are still there with blood on them, while these surgeons had operated in this open field, this open parking lot. And here I am just kind of looking at this stuff all around me, and I've got this unique job. It's cadaver searches. At this point, I'm out looking for bodies. For 3 days, I went out and I searched just to see if we could find anyone else that was perhaps alive. But it had been a few days now, and we were now in recovery mode. And so we're using our noses about as much as we used our eyes as we tried to find people that might be buried in rubble. Rain was coming in, and I remember it was about my 3rd day in, and there's people coming from all over. I remember we'd load on the back of this truck. They'd drive us from downtown Joplin out to this hospital. You jump out of the bed of this truck, and I remember jumping out. I remember walking up, and this guy yells at me, "You're in charge," and I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing. But here's doctors, nurses, EMT, firefighters, and I guess it's one of those things because I'm the tallest at that point, I'm in charge. And he gives us a grid, and we search, and we search another grid, and finally we come back, and we're just worn out. rain's coming in. I got a rain jacket on. It's just cold rain. You can hear thunder and lightning off in the distance, and we're just eating these little cold cut sandwiches. One of those spiritual moments I've experienced. And I wish if it wasn't so shocking, I could tell you what was actually said. But I think the offense of what was said for some of you just wouldn't be worth, the shock value just wouldn't be worth it. So I'm gonna desensitize this and kind of sterilize it a bit and soften the story because I just don't think it's appropriate to say from stage. But I'll never forget that night. Met that day, actually. I'm sitting there and I'm eating this little cold cut sandwich. There's probably 50 or 60 of us. There's other people out running grid searches. And here we are in this moment, cold, shaking. And you know the lull you get in a conversation where there's a group of people sitting around. For some reason, I don't know, it's some sort of psychological, sociological thing. The hush just kind of comes over. Nobody really knows why. There's a guy and he's leaning up against this bus. He looks like Gimli off Lord of the Rings. He's built like a dwarf, stands about that tall, big old beard. And I heard him talking earlier. He was a firefighter, retired firefighter from Kansas City, and he'd come down to do cadaver and body searches. The guy next to him's got cadaver dogs that they're working with and all that kind of stuff. And here's this guy sitting there, and he makes this statement in the lull of the conversation. The thunder hushes for a second, the rain kind of subsides, and his voice just carries over this parking lot with 50 or 60 of us sitting there. And he makes this statement, and I won't say exactly what he said because it was pretty rough. He says, if it wasn't for the, and he puts in an expletive. If it wasn't for the something church, I don't know what this town would do. I just kind of looked up, like, you don't hear that and church go together very often? Got my attention. He goes, I'm not kidding, man. If it wasn't for the, and he threw it out again. If it wasn't for the church, this town, man, they'd be in big trouble. And everybody's just quiet. All 50, 60 people looking at this guy. We all just kind of get real quiet. He looks at all of them and goes, I'm serious, man. And he said that this blinking, and I'm not trying to be crass. Honestly, it was a holy moment. As much as you're like, oh, you shouldn't do that. It was holy. He says, this blinking church, they're getting it done, man. And I realized in that moment, at a moment of beauty, the church is being praised for what she's always been best at. Responding to the physical needs of people when they find themselves in crisis. That's what we've been known for. But for too often and too many times in our life, we find ourselves unwilling to risk it. Find ourselves struggling with that moment. And we sit in here last night and we have this moment, we break chains, we break shackles, and we talk about this enemy who is here to condemn us, and it's all true. There's no condemnation, and we talk about Satan being the accuser, and he is the accuser, but that's not all he does. See, in me, there's a virus inside of me. There's like this alien nature that lives in here. And sometimes it's not the bad things he tells me to do. Sometimes it's not the bad things that this nature inside of me that whispers little things in my head. I mean, he does sometimes. He whispers to me to think this way or say this or look at this or do this or he whispers those things to me, but that's usually not what gets me in the most trouble. You know what really gets me? It's not all the bad things he gets me to do. Sometimes he gets me by failing to do the good things I should do. I think for some of you here, your biggest struggle, honestly, might not be all the sin you're in. For some of you in this room, your biggest struggle is that you're continually told to do good. And you push it down and you quiet it. And the voice that's telling you, don't worry about it, somebody else has got it. The voice that's telling you, they'll be okay. The voice that's telling you, just send them a quick text message or tell them you're thinking about them or make that passing comment and I'll pray for you. That voice that's telling you to be passive in your reaction, I believe is the same voice that's the accuser. And sometimes it's not the bad things he gets you to do. Sometimes it's when you know the good thing to do, but you just don't do it. See, what we were known for is that we were known for being a people who would risk it. I mean, you look at the early church from the very beginning, man, they risked it. Jesus knew exactly what they were going to get into. It was a story. It plays out like around AD 150. It doesn't matter the year. AD 150 in Rome. This guy Tertullian writes about it. And what ended up happening is this plague, smallpox, comes into Rome. Smallpox comes in and rages all over. And they say that nearly 2,000 people a day were dying. 2,000 people a day were dying. Nobody wanted smallpox. Nobody wanted to catch that disease. So you know what all the pagans, all the non-believers did? They all packed up their stuff and they bailed and they left the city. But when they left the city, something happened. All their family members were left behind. The Christians did something interesting. They stayed. And Tertullian writes this. He makes this statement. You read it up here. He says, it's our care of the helpless. He said, our practice of loving kindness that brands us in the eyes of our many opponents. Only look, they say, look how they love one another. The death ratio among Christians was about 25 to 30%. The death ratio among pagans was 50% plus. Why? Because the Christians looked after each other. Because the Christians were willing to risk it. They're willing to lay their very lives on the line for their brothers and sisters. They met people with smallpox, even to the point where they would take the very disease on themselves in order to care for a brother or sister in need. And not only do they care for their own, they care for their pagan neighbors as well. Because their fathers, their mothers, their aunts, their uncles, their children had abandoned grandma, had abandoned the baby, had abandoned the infant, and had bailed for the city. Let's get out of here. Let's go for the country. Let's flee. And they left these people behind to die. But not the Christians. It didn't just happen in AD 150. It happened again. You show up around AD 260, 250, something like that. Another disease sweeps in to Rome. This time they think it was probably measles. And actually this disease goes from Ethiopia all the way up to Scotland. And they say the death toll from the measles was even higher than the death toll from smallpox. And again, the non-Christians fled. And again, the Christians, they risk it. Dionysius writes this. He says, most of our brother Christians showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless in danger, they took charge of the sick, attending every need and ministering to them in Christ. And with them departed this life serenely happy, for they were inflicted by others with the disease, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbors. And cheerfully accepting their pains, many in nursing others transferred death to themselves and died in their stead. The best of our brothers lost their lives in this manner, so that death in this form seems every way the equal of martyrdom. See, we come from a stock of people who don't turn away. We come from a stock of people who stand their ground in opposition, who make themselves available when people suffer, who make themselves available when people hurt. But our enemies come in. And our enemies got us to the point we just don't want to risk it anymore. The same enemy that's tempting you to look at pornography, the same enemy that's tempting you to do things in a dating life, the same enemies that's tempting you to anger, to lust, to envy, to strife, the same enemy has another tactic. It's not like this is his only one. It's not like sin is his only end game. It's not like that's the only win he's out to get. Do you understand, church, that if he can immobilize us as believers, if he can somehow numb our hearts and our conscience, if he can shut us up and shut us down, he wins. And for some of you, sin is not your only problem. You've forgotten the stock you come from. And you've forgotten what it means to risk it. If you look in your Bibles at Matthew chapter 25, I love what Jesus says here. Because I read this scripture different when I hear from Dionysius. I read this scripture different when I hear from Tertullian. I read it differently when I understand the story. Because Jesus had a plan. When he said these words, Jesus knew what would happen to Rome. When he said, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat." You have to keep in mind when you're sitting there with smallpox or measles and you're unable to get out of a bed because of the fever and the sores, when there's no tap water that you can just go in the other room and turn it on. It doesn't exist. If nobody goes to the well and draws water for you and brings it into your house, and you're so weak you can't even get there, and even if you got there, they're going to chase you off because you carry the disease. Sometimes the most basic thing that keeps you alive is just simple nursing. Just give this sick person something to drink, for crying out loud. Make some soup for them because their bodies are weakening. And Jesus knew, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger with smallpox and measles, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. And whatever you did at the bottom for one of the least these brothers of mine, you did for me. And keep in mind, it's not like they're just loving half a world away. They're loving next door. But honestly, the pagans, the non-Christians, they were attracted to the Christians for this reason. They watched the way the community came together. They watched the way they nursed and cared for one another. They watched the way they washed one another's wounds. They watched the way that even though all the other religious leaders in the pagan temples would flee for the mountains, the Christians stayed put. And every sick person in that city knew if you needed help, the only place you would find it was from the Christians. There's a guy named Julian. He was an emperor. He did not like Christians a whole lot. Constantine tries to introduce Christianity, and Julian shows up, and in this whole process of Julian coming on the stage, he does his best to say, man, we got to get rid of these Christians, all right? This is like 100 years later. So they get the measles 100 years later, or get smallpox, 100 years later they got measles, and then 100 years later they got Julian, who's about as bad as smallpox and measles because he's doing everything he can to run them out. In fact, he doesn't allow them to be called Christians anymore. He just calls them Galileans. Not allowed to even call them Christians. And that's our equivalent. If I could, I don't know, I'm a redneck. We'll just use this. That's the equivalent of calling them rednecks. So all the Christians in Rome, and there were wealthy people that were believers. Don't think it was just the impoverished. There were wealthy people. He says, we're not going to call you Galileans, rednecks. So that was a term that they used for them. Just call them rednecks. But Julian got so frustrated because he couldn't get rid of them. And in fact, it is something interesting. He writes this to a pagan priest of his about Christians. He gets frustrated because there's so many. He says, they're Christians, their benevolence towards strangers, and their care for the graves of the dead, that's why they're growing. It's a Roman emperor complaining to the pagan priest about these stupid Christians. He goes on, he went on to write, he says, I think that when the poor happen to be neglected and overlooked by the priest, the impious rednecks observed and devoted themselves to benevolence. They support not only their poor, but ours as well. And everyone can see that our people lack from aid from us. He took away their benefits. He took away their books so they couldn't teach. He took away their name. Julian went to war, hating Christians, calling them these redneck Galileans. He went to war. He's fighting against these German mercenaries. And he's so full of himself. And in fact, one of the things that he did that I thought was interesting is he actually says, listen, here's the plan. He says, I want us to provide all of their needs. We're going to meet their needs like crazy. We're going to provide their health care. And he literally says, we're going to be the outlet for their finances. And we're going to provide like retirement for them. And he says, listen, we're going to provide all this. And eventually they're going to look to us, the government, as being the supplier of the needs of the people. And they'll look at us for their needs. Hold on, does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? Oh, this isn't the first time this strategy's been used. Marginalize objectives and tactics that belong to the church. Listen, I'm not a guy that's here to rage against government. There's a reason why they had to step into unemployment. There's a reason why they've had to step into healthcare. There's a reason why they've had to step into the marginalized people of society. It's because we lost the ability to risk. We stopped being the very people who should be meeting people on the margins and fringes, and now we've relegated it to government to take care of, just like Julian tried to do. It's not the government, it's not the problem. We are. I am, and you are. Interesting thing, though. Julian charges the battle, doesn't even put on his helmet or breastplate. He's so cocky about how bad he is. He's an emperor, sees himself as a god. He charges into battle, and a German mercenary turns around and throws a lance at him, and it penetrates right in the stomach and pierces the lower lobe of his liver. And the words attributed, his last words, attributed to him are those words. Vexiti Galilee, which means you have won, Galilean. Everything he tried to do to shut Christians down, he had all the influence and power of an army, the influence and power of a government, the influence and power of an emperor, but the one thing he could not stop was their love. The one thing he could not stop was their benevolence. The one thing he could never stop was their care for the broken and the needy. Vexiti Galilean! You have won, Jesus. You have won, Jesus. Would they say that about us when they see our homeless communities? Would they say that about us and our silence? Oh, I'm not talking about our social media silence. We're real loud there. I'm talking about our silence and actually producing activity when it comes to addressing issues of immigration. Would they say that when it comes to our issues, when it comes to race in our own country, oh, we're real loud on social media. We'll talk and talk and talk. But what happened to people who come from a birthright of risking it? Where have you gone, church? He's not only convinced you to sin, he's numbed you to doing good things. And now you expect the government to take care of it. Or you expect your church to form a committee. Or you expect them to hire a staff member to do your job. That's never been what it was. It's always been individual believers acting as a body of Christ, infiltrating communities. If you get into John's words, he says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on that person, no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or in speech, but in actions and in truth. I love that phrase that he says there. So we know what true love is. Jesus Christ. I don't know if you know this, but Christ is not his last name. It's not. As Jesus does his signature, he does not sign Jesus. I don't have a middle name, Christ. That's not how that works. Christ is his title. And what he's saying is that the God that put the oxygen in your lungs, the God that caused the sun to shine, the God who causes your heart to keep beating in your chest, as we said in this room, is the God of the universe, creator, humbled himself for creation. He goes on to say, not only is Jesus Christ, but he laid down his life for us. Man, we know this. Sometimes I think we might be a little too quick to jump to the cross, though. No doubt that the cross is what he's pointing to. No doubt that the cross is implied so much here. But there's more here. Jesus laid down his life long before the cross. Jesus laid down his life when he was willing to meet that demoniac that Mark talked about and engage with him. Jesus laid down his life when he was willing to walk up to a woman that no one else would even talk to. He laid down his life in that moment, and he touched someone that no one else would touch. He laid down his life when he engaged with a leper. He laid down his life when he was willing to meet with a paralytic. He laid down his life when he would spend time with sinners, prostitutes, and political degenerates. He laid down his life daily, not just on a cross. That's part of it. That's the consummation of it. And he wants us to lay down our lives daily. We ought to lay down our lives. The phrase there means a continual motion of doing it. Oh, what do you mean, lay down our lives? It's not like we're doing bad things here, Jace. Yeah, but sometimes it's not the bad things you do, it's the good things you don't do. Do you hear me? Listen to me. When it comes to the worm, this virus infecting your brain, it's not always the bad things you do. A lot of times, it's the good things that you don't do. It's the opportunities to have an impact for the gospel, but you failed to risk it. The voice tells you, oh, somebody else has got it, and you watch this neighbor continue to suffer. You watch this person continue to struggle, and you don't do anything about it. One of the worst things that's happened to us is a thing on social media where you can actually say, oh, man, praying for you, but never actually go and physically pray with that person. We ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. I want to talk about this real quick. I love what it says in John 15. John writes, he said, my command is this, love each other as I loved you. Greater love has no one than this, and he would lay down his life for one's friends. This is going to take a little bit of a turn that some of you might be a little bit uncomfortable with, and I want you to trek with me. When John writes this, and he says, this is how we know what love is, that Jesus Christ didn't lay his life for us, we ought to lay down our life for our brothers and sisters. Who are our brothers and sisters? I mean, eventually, everyone in the world is my brother. I mean, I know some of you in here, if I were to ask you, oh yeah, everybody's my brother, everybody's my sister, and you could make a case for that. You know, we can go to, the parable of the Good Samaritan, I get it, but that's not what John means here. When John talks about brothers or sisters here, it's a very narrow phrase he's getting at. This is not like all of humanity. And in fact, brothers and sisters in that discussion, what it actually means when he writes it specifically are fellow Christians. I think one of the things that disturbs me that I see happening is that we'll care for people half a world away, but we won't care for the people who sit at our own churches. We'll bend over backwards to be gracious and kind to somebody else we've never met. But then we'll dog somebody in our church and stab him right in the back. John introduced this whole thing by talking about Cain, and don't be like Cain because he was a murderer. You're like, well, Jayson, I'm not killing anybody. Really, what about character assassination? Well, what about when you get to the point that you talk so negatively about somebody that it's just like you're stabbing them in the heart emotionally? Or what about the fact that you think you're so cool that you don't have to socially connect with other believers in your own church and in your own youth group? Don't tell me you don't have malice in your heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. Most of the people want to stop right there. Let us do good to all people. But Paul doesn't stop there. He says, especially those who belong to the family of believers. Man, it is bad enough that you would treat somebody improperly at a line at Walmart, or that you would treat somebody improperly if you're, I know I struggle. I go to a stoplight, somebody cuts me off. I can be a real jerk in my own heart, and man, half the time I wish that the world was Mario Kart and I could throw red turtle shells at them, okay? I get it, man. I get it. My wife, when I'm driving, is probably when I reflect Jesus the least in my life. But I think about this passage. It meant to treat another person poorly is bad. To treat another Christian poorly is monstrous. You're going to spend eternity with this person. They've been created in the identity of Jesus. They are formed and fashioned after him. They carry the very Spirit of God inside of them. For you to treat another person bad, that's poor form. For you to treat another Christian bad is monstrous. How are you treating the people that you sit in the pews with? let us do good to everyone, but especially those that belong to the family of believers. I got to get moving a little bit here. I love when it talks about giving in this text. He says, if your brother has material possessions, he says, give it. Give your material possessions up. Be willing to risk the things you have. I want you to think about how much your and my life looks like the early church. Look at these people, man. All the believers were together. They had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And it goes down to the bottom, and it says the Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. And not only that, but go on. You can look on. Move on to Acts chapter 4. Says the same thing. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. There were no needy persons among them. People owned houses or land. They sold them. They brought the money for themselves. They distributed to anyone who had need. And one thing I'm finding within us as individual believers, and I'm not calling out the church, I'm calling out me, I'm calling out you, is that we have hoarded this wealth that we have as if it was meant for us. Risk it. Lay it down. Surrender it. Give it over to God. Let him use it for his purposes. Let him use it for his kingdom. Love what Wesley says. He says, it's not how much of my money I will give to God, but how much of God's money I will keep for myself. He also goes on to say, dear children, let us not love with words or in speech, but with actions and in truth. Some of us are, I've had the privilege of watching my boys play Fortnite. Yes. Way too many hours, Levi. He considers himself to be a Fortnite legend. True? Come on, nod your head. Huh? What? Yeah. All that says is you played too much Fortnite. 170 wins is what he said. Yeah, it's too much Fortnite is what that is. Don't applaud that. No. All right, stand up and bow. Yeah. Do you want to give me your user handle while we're at it? No, we're not going to. I laugh sometimes because I'll go down and just hang and just sit with my boys. I watch it. And some of us are kind of like the guy that's like in squad mode. And if you don't know what Fortnite is, where have you been? But if you don't know what it is, that's cool. I'm going to talk to where are my Fortnite people in the room real quick? Raise your hands. There we go. Let me speak to you for a second. You know what it's like when you're in squad mode and you get hit and you know that your buddies have mats, but they won't share any of them? You know how frustrating that is? Yes. Some of you are like, you get it. I just resonated with you at like a deeply spiritual level. You understand. Like, bro, you got mats. Share the wealth. Like, I don't know what that blue jug thing is, but like, give me some of that, okay? Give me some minis, man. Let's go. Help a brother out. You're looking at this going, man, I can't believe I'm getting applause for this. You know they got a med kit, you know, or they got bandages, and you're like, they're just like running around doing the stupid dance over you, and you're like, come on. Hey, what's the difference when we're loaded as Christians and we don't share? What's the difference when we are racked with wealth and somebody in our church has poverty in their heart and their life and we don't address it? We're no different than that teammate that won't actually engage. To have people on our team that are suffering and we're not doing anything about it, that's monstrous, folks. Do you understand why Jesus said this? He knew something special would happen, that when a group of believers came together, and not like a clique that says, we just look out for one another. No, that's not what it is. It's not what it's about. It's not about forming this inward clique where we look after our own. No. It's about forming this unit that is so close, that takes care of one another so well, that all of a sudden over here, a non-believer looks over that and says, man, I want some of that. That's my story. I grew up in a home, like I told you guys. My mom stirred marriage, live-in boyfriends, keggers at my house, and it wasn't abusive. I don't want to get my house like it was an abusive place. It wasn't. But it was like debauchery. It was evil. It was not of Jesus. And I look at this man, and this chubby little kid invited me into his home, and he shared the wealth, man. He shared it with me. I came from a broken, poor home, and he brought me in. And what I saw in that moment, I met the church long before I met Jesus because of Curtis. Because when I went in and I saw that, and not only that, but I went to church for the first time, and we hung out, and I saw the way they treated each other with such love. I was like, what in the world is this place? This is the most bizarre place I've ever been. Nobody's drunk. Everybody's high-fiving. They all love each other. They all speak kind to each other. I mean, my brothers were like, hey, pass the blank and cereals, what it was like in my house. I'd wake up to people like passed out on the floor and half clothed. I mean, we sat at their house the first time. I remember Curtis, they said that we started praying. They joined hands together. I'm like, how do we get to eat with our holding hands? What in the world? And then we played wiffle ball, and we ate chocolate chip cookies, and you know what he gave me? A glimpse of family. I needed that. See, salvation is not just something that comes someday far off. Salvation is not just something that's just delayed until our heart stops beating. Salvation doesn't just come because somebody puts us 6 foot under, in the ground, and they go eat chicken and potato salad, and then, hey, we don't have to live our whole lives just waiting for that. While that is true, while that is amazing, Jesus also says that salvation is here. Why does it feel like it sometimes? Because we were meant to bring salvation to this place as a church. We were meant to bring it. We were meant to bring it when people have smallpox and measles. We were meant to bring it when people live in a home where family isn't around. We were meant to bring it. But we stopped risking it a long time ago. We stopped taking chances. We stopped going all in with love. My dad worked construction. Pretty much, even though he's been retired for years, still the hardest working man. He's probably like 70-some years old. He could still kick my butt. Tough as nails, man. We lived out in the country, and I know this isn't a cool thing to say, but I'll just say it. We didn't have people come pick up our trash, so we destroyed the environment back then. We burned our trash because there was no dumpsters or trash pickup. You just put in a 55-gallon drum and you burned it. That's how you got rid of it. We didn't have any other way to do it. I mean, we were living way out in the sticks. I remember I went out there one day. My mom said, hey, Jason, go burn the trash. I went out there and I burned the trash. And we kind of I'd been going to church with Curtis for a while. And my dad was like, I don't want you going to that church. We're going to a different church. And so we loaded up a few Sundays and we drove in this little bitty country church in the middle of nowhere, cow pasture. I remember one Sunday we pulled up and my dad goes, we're not dressed for this. So we turned around and left the parking lot and went home. Remember another Sunday we drove up, and the way I remember it is my dad's like, we're not dressed for this. And so we literally turned around the parking lot. We'd all got in this old, ugly brown station wagon. We drove back home. Showed up the third week, man. He was like, all right, we're going in. Walked inside, and I talked to my dad a little bit. He chit-chatted. He made it sound like he had been going to church, like, yeah, the church of Jim Beam and Jack Daniels. Church of Budweiser. And he wasn't abusive. I don't want to make it sound like it. It's not my intent. I remember we'd gone 2 or 3 times. Ate some ice cream afterwards. I was like, this is cool. I went to burn that trash that night. Probably about 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something, maybe 2 o'clock. I ran in to take a shower because it was hot. And my mom yelled, Jason, there's a fire. Jason, there's a fire. And I got out of this shower, I'm just trying to throw clothes on. It's like trying to put clothes on when you're wet. And I'm like 9, 10 years old or something like that. I don't even know how old, probably 10. I take off running outside, and I look, and there's something that's blown out. It's actually my mom's fault. My mom did this. There's an aerosol can in it. And if you heat up an aerosol can, it'll blow up. And a hairspray can had been in there, and it blew up, and it caught these leaves on fire. And we lived in the sticks, man. And so the leaves on fire, and I watch them. They burn over. And as I run out there, I look, and my brother's car's on fire. He had this car that he was restoring. It was a 55 Chevy 2-door hardtop. Beautiful car. He was going to fix it all up. It was ready to go. He's going to take it to college. And I look, and the leaves are burning underneath his car. And I grab the hose. I take off running. And boom, I'm like 40 yards short. I'm trying to squirt water, from here all the way out to where front of house is. And it's hitting about where the cameras are. And I get no more hose. And I'm just like, I run back in. I'm like, Mom! I don't know what to do. And it's not just a car. I mean, if it's going to burn all the way over our house, and our whole house is going to burn down, and my dad's tools that he's not using at work that day, they're going to be gone. I mean, everything's going to be gone. It's all going to be gone. And my mom, this is before cell phones and pagers and all that. And so she's like, we got to get a hold of your dad. And so she calls this lady. There were no cell phones back then, no pagers. He's building a new house. There's no phone there. Calls this lady up. Says, hey, Vicki. This lady had gone to church, and my mom knew that she lived close to where my dad was working. She said, hey, Vicki, could you get your car and run over and tell Dan that the woods are on fire and we're just going to burn down the house? And she said, okay, honey, you bet, I'll do that. Before she got in her car and drove over there, she just made a quick phone call to the church. Just a quick phone call. Hey, just want to let you guys know that the McGrew's property's on fire right now. My stepdad, Dan McGrew, their property's on fire right now. And she hung up, and she jumped in her car and took over. Told my dad, he's up on a roof, and he starts pulling tools off and putting them in the truck, telling all the other workers, going home, and he's packing it all up. Finally gets the whole thing packed up, and he heads home. When he pulls up, my mom, she's stirring lemonade. She's stirring lemonade on the front porch. I'm sitting there just talking to all these people. My dad's weaving around cars, trying to get into our house, and fire's completely put out. My dad looked around. You know who was there? You were there. You were there. Because you're the church. And you showed up for my stepdad. You showed up for my family. None of his pagan friends that drank and partied, none of them would have showed up. But you showed up. You brought rakes to my home. You raked that fire till it was out. You brought people with you. You didn't just say, oh, that's too bad. You didn't just post on social media, I got bad news. No, you got in your car. You grabbed a rake and you came to my house. You risked it for my dad. And that's the day. That's the day he came to Christ. Shortly after that, he loaded up all that alcohol. He broke every bottle, and I was with him. Called his pagan friends and said, I'm done. Because he found a community that didn't just love with their mouths, man. They didn't just love with their tweets. They didn't just love with the logos on a bunch of stupid shirts. No, man, they showed up and they risked it for us. That's the stock you come from. That's your bloodline. You don't let the government take that from you. You don't let the enemy take that from you by dulling your heart to say that somebody else will take care of it. It's your bloodline. It's your birthright. It's the plan of God to transform a nation. As we show up for one another, and everyone will look, and they'll say, I want in on that. And we'll nurse their wounds. We'll be there when their parents die. We'll be there when their world is burning down. Because we're the church. And the gates of hell can't stop us. Grab your coin. I'm calling on you to risk it. To stop playing it safe. To realize that thinking that the fact that you don't sin is Satan somehow, his biggest obstacle is getting you to sin. No. His game plan is not just keeping you from sinning. His game plan is also to keep you from doing the good things you need to do. I want you to grab this coin. Now, here in a minute, if you've got one now, I want you to take your Sharpie out, and you're going to write your name anywhere on that coin in Sharpie. Listen, I'm going to give you instructions. You can do it later. Just listen to me right now. I want to write your name on that Sharpie. And then in your small group, here's what you're going to do. You're going to trade these coins here in a little bit with somebody else, and you're going to give them a coin with your name on it. And listen, don't give it to the dude who will never hold you accountable. Don't give it to the girl that just lets you get away with crap. You give it to the person you're like, oh, crud, I don't want to give it to them because I know they're going to text me. And I want you to do this for the next 30 days. I want you to take this coin. You're going to trade with somebody else, so you'll have their name. They'll have yours. And every day for 30 days, I want you to flip it. And if their name comes up, I want you to text them and go, guess what? You're in. Today, your job is to find a reckless way to live a life of contrast, a life of love and not a life of fear. You're in, man. You got to risk it today. And if that's you and you get that text, you look for every way possible to physically find a way to risk. Whether that's giving money. Maybe you load up and you literally go to a nursing home because you know how few visitors they get there? And you find out somebody from your church that's at that nursing home, and you show up and say, I don't know you, but we go to the same church, or at least we used to. And I hear you can't make it anymore, and I'm here today just to have a conversation with you. Or maybe you find out somebody in your church that's going through a difficult time, and they can have their lawn mowed. I don't know what it is. You seek the Holy Spirit in it, but you text them. And then if it comes up with the other side with no name, you're in. You're in. And you send the text and you say, I'm in today. I'm in. I'm up. And we go back to doing what the church did. They looked every day for opportunities to elevate and show the presence of Jesus. Church, let us bring salvation, not just in heaven, which is going to happen and will be beautiful. Let us bring salvation today. Let us bring it today. And don't ever think you can't win somebody with a rake. Thank you.